I have to say, for as long as I've been in IT and security, which has been a very long time, this topic has been, well, let's say, always a challenging topic. There are two sides to this coin, and both sides are right. And it's an argument and a discussion that hasn't gone away. And I'm going to give you a couple of recent examples in this. So it's government access to keys. And here's what the idea is. Let's say a software company creates a product, or a hardware company creates a product that encrypts your data. And you want to keep it private. You want to keep it secret. It's your stuff. Well, what if, though, you commit a crime? What if you commit espionage, or you commit some form of treason? Treason? No, not treason. Treason or terrorism, or you are under investigation by the FBI. That information may not be as private as you thought it was. What this is that software companies will give copies of their keys to the government. Now, the government is responsible to keep these keys not accessible or usable. They keep them in a key escrow. Sometimes it's a third party within the government, or a third party key escrow, that these keys can be used when necessary in order to, well, uncrack something so that they can see what it is. So in common times, if there's a court order or a warrant that is obtained in order to be able to use that. Now, we've had this process in place for longer than you might be aware. And it's certainly starting after 9/11, this was enhanced, and even more was put into this. And let me give you what one of the arguments has been, and how some people have gotten around this. There are encryption methods and communication manners where the government does not have access to these keys. And right now, at the time of this recording, and I'm sure when you're listening to it, it's still going to be an argument, there are some of these secured programs that the government cannot decrypt. They cannot monitor, they can't check. And there's a challenge right now with terrorism being utilized on these communication channels. But there are people that create these communication channels for a different, not so that terrorists can communicate and not be monitored. It's so that they believe, though, your privacy is your privacy. You have a right to keep your data secured from prying eyes, and regardless of who that is. Now, whichever side of this argument you might kind of lean towards, both sides are correct. The government wants access for, criminal activity, which makes a lot of sense. And with all of our activities being on electronic devices, our phones, our tablets, all of that kind of stuff, this is a challenge today, and the communications across the internet. However, there's also some righteousness in the idea that, well, I have some private medical records. I have some things that I don't want anybody to know, because they don't have according to me, they don't have that authority. Now, there's another example of this, and I kind of want to clarify this one a little bit. Recently, Apple has been under scrutiny because the FBI has had a phone that they need cracked, and they haven't been able to crack it. Now, Apple usually helps the government, and so do other companies, open up their phones in when there's a court order. In this case, this was a little bit different. What the FBI needed Apple to do was not just pull the data out of the encryption that they'd already put on there, but they wanted a backdoor written into the operating system. This is something that doesn't already exist, and it creates a weak point to the encryption. And here's Apple's argument is, if we do this for you, it's immediately going to get out. Hackers are going to be able to crack into anybody's phone, and then in real time, because of this backdoor. And that's a very big concern. The FBI's position is that we need to get the data off this phone, and we don't know how to do it at this point. Now, fortunately, this argument kind of settled down when the FBI did find a third party that could crack the Apple phone and get the data off. However, you can imagine this argument is going to continue for some time. So as you think about government access to keys, be aware that this is an ongoing discussion with everybody. And it's been going on as long as I've been in IT. It'll probably be going on as long as you're in IT. But this is generally the idea to government access to keys. When you were watching the SSCP cryptography course, we talked about digital signatures. We talked about them a couple of different ways, and digital signatures are a way of proving that the message came from a particular person. This was part of non-repudiation. That person can't say later that it didn't come from them because it used their certificate, it used their signature to create it. So both it requires authentication and it gives us non-repudiation. What I didn't do, though, was actually relate it to a set of algorithms or standards, and I just wanted to kind of point a couple of things out. So DSA, which stands for Digital Signature Algorithms, this is for the generation and verification of digital signatures. And the standard that it's under is the Federal Information Processing Standard, FIPS 186. And you'll see documentation out there on this if you start to look it up. And one of the current release of this is FIPS 186-4, which came out in 2013. Now, this is a key generation process that we can do for this, creating both a public and private key pair. You'll remember this from the asymmetrical conversations that we had in the SSCP cryptography course. And you get a lot of benefits out of this. You know, the best benefit is, and I think I had mentioned this before, it's a lot better than a handwritten signature that is easy to forge. That's one of the ideas behind this, is that maybe Mary has sent me a paper note that said, you know, you're fired. And that, which would not be nice for Mary to do. And it's signed with Mary's signature, but that could have been forged by anybody. This gives us the non-repudiation aspects of, no, if you actually got an electronic message from Mary that says, doesn't say you're fired, of course, says you're getting a pay raise, then it actually came from Mary that way. And it verifies the identity of the signator, and the integrity of the data is the idea here under this standard. And it makes it really easy for businesses to do transactions. But I want to point something out, and I've mentioned this throughout, is that, you know, one of the things with cryptography is if you don't use it properly, then, and I mentioned here, it kind of reduces effectiveness, and this can actually get out of control. And I'm remembering a part of DSA, which was and I don't know if you'll remember me talking about this from the SSCP cryptography, but I mentioned something about elliptical curve algorithms. Well, there's an elliptical curve digital signature algorithm, ECDSA, that part of this is that you have to make sure that the keys that you're using are regenerated every time it's used, or there are ways during transmission that somebody can start to figure out what the key is and therefore unravel the whole thing. I even had a process where I was showing you that. This is very important, and if those keys aren't regenerated properly, then problems happen. And this actually happened with Sony and PlayStation 3. They were their games and all that were generating. They were using the same key over and over again, and then all the game keys got hacked. So yeah, but it's happened to a lot of folks with this. So one of the things is not just with DSA, but with any type of encryption that you're working with, you want to make sure that you are implementing it properly and following proper procedures for it, or it can crumble on you. If you remember back in the SSCP cryptography course, one of the things I talked about is Web of Trust. And this was especially a big deal. It's still a big deal today, but it was a huge deal when I was younger and this first came out, which was 91, 92. That Web of Trust is where you don't have a centralized PKI environment, but you want the exchange of certificates. You want certificates to work just as you would. So you authorize within a group of people, you can exchange certificates. And I even talked about that process. So if you forgot about it, go back and look at the Web of Trust. How we do that is by using PGP, pretty good privacy. And I have it in the slide at some point, but this is for data encryption and decryption. And this came out in 1991. That's where I have it somewhere here in the slide. Phil Zimmerman put this together, and it's used today for signing. You can use it for encrypting files, email, and one of the tools, and this is why I'm bringing it up again, one of the tools that I'm going to give you is a disk partition encryption tool that uses PGP for it. Now, pretty good privacy. I forget why he came up with the name Pretty Good Privacy. This was Phil Zimmerman in 91 came out with this. I think it may have had something to do with a restaurant, if I can remember correctly. And there, by the way, there's great history behind PGP. At the time when this came out in 1991, getting good encryption was pretty tough. And this was encryption that necessarily the government didn't have access to. Remember we talked about the government access to keys? Because you're doing this with your friends. And so the government's not involved. One of the challenges, and I remember when this was going on, was that this was better encryption than was allowed to be exported. And what that means is that it couldn't be used by foreign governments because the government, our government, couldn't crack it. And so Phil Zimmerman had marked this. I think, you know, as he was talking about it when it released in 91, had marked everything as, you know, not for export. But that doesn't actually prevent it from being exported. And it got exported, and the government actually started, you know, investigating him. And there was a period of time we thought that they might throw him in jail for, you know, exporting this encryption system when he didn't intend it to be exported. A lot of great history here, but this is really good and we still use it today. And I just wanted to mention again because of one of the tools. And I just wanted to remind you that PGP is what we use with the Web of Trust. And for the last topic in this module, I wanted to talk about side-channel attacks. And I have to say this past the basics of this, it even makes my mind shudder. I refer to this as the true Sherlock Holmes of attacks. And really what this is a physical attack on a cryptographic device. And here's what I mean as a physical attack. This is a piece of hardware that we're attacking that's doing the cryptography. And we want to find a way to be able to attack this device to figure out what information is being sent. But here's what's unique about it. And this sounds kind of strange. The attack is based on how the algorithms are implemented, not on the algorithm itself. So instead of attacking the math, attacking the algorithm and trying to figure it out, what we're actually trying to do is, well, listen to the device and see if there's a non-direct way to understand what's going on. Now, I have an example here in a second, but there's a few ways to do this. Power consumption, and we can do what's called a simple or differential power analysis, where we can determine, you know, generating through these algorithms, choose up more power. So maybe there's a power consumption method that when it's working through the algorithm, we could start to detect what changes are there. You see what I mean? This gets really intense. We can measure variations of the electromagnetic field on a chip as it's doing the calculations, and from that glean some additional hope. There's even ways by light. There are people that can, by a monitor, broadcasting itself against a wall, they can see the shifting in light against the wall to see what's actually written on the monitor. This is how this kind of works. We're attacking not the algorithm, but we're attacking the device, and finding weaknesses of the device is really the goal. Acoustic attacks, and this is one of the best examples I can give because I think this really kind of comes in. Do you remember the old rotary phones? Probably not. But here's a very simple one, because I actually did this as a study a long time ago. You could tell by the clicks when somebody was using a rotary phone. You could tell by the clicks when it was snapping back what number they had dialed. So if you just listen to somebody as they're dialing a number, you can write down what the telephone number is. See, that's a side channel attack. There's other things. The particular click and clacking of a keyboard. Anything that emits sounds. You may have seen, was it War Games, where he was using a coin or a bottle top or something to try to connect a phone. Well, it used to be in the old days, you could whistle into a phone just like a modem does. And you could make connections to systems this way by whistling through it. There was also a way to even open up the phone and allow it to dial long distance without recording it. Now, these methods don't work anymore. These are the old phone freaking things that used to be able to be done. But, you know, there's ways to exploit it through sound and all that kind of stuff. So side channel attacks, the moral of the story is we're attacking the device, not really the algorithm. And so you can imagine the science involved in this and trying to figure out a way to detect how to crack what's going on by one of these methods. And it's definitely very interesting. This is something that you might actually get really interested into and do more studies on, kind of like what, I got interested in it and did the whole, rotary phone thing. Although you don't hear people dialing on phones anymore with everybody's cell phone, but there's a lot of ways that you can dive further into side channel attacks. Whether you're just getting started in your security and IT career, or if you've been doing this quite a long time, one of the things that you're going to be able to need to do, and you may already be doing this, is you're going to be able to need to manage remote machines. And here's what I mean by that. From my laptop, I want to be able to connect to a remote computer, and it doesn't matter whether it's Linux or Windows, they both have this similar capability. I want to connect to that remote machine and execute commands on that remote machine to do things with that remote machine. Now, this may not have anything to do with cryptography per se that you're doing on the remote machine. Could be ordinary management or configuration tasks. The key here, though, is I need to do it securely. I don't want a man-in-the-middle attack, somebody sniffing what commands I'm running on that remote machine. One of the ways we can do this on Linux-based systems, and also you can use the same thing on Windows as well, is SSH or Secure Shell. And here's what that is. This is a program basically that provides secure remote command execution and file transfers from your machine to a remote machine. And in an example here, I have Bash up, and this is a Linux-based box, and you can tell if you're looking at the screen, it happens to be my Mac. And what you do, the basic usage of the command, you can do man, M-A-N, SSH, to see more about this, but you SSH and you give it that remote machine, what on that machine is your username at that machine name. And it'll prompt you for a password, and then you have access to the machine. I ran an ls command, and that command is running on that remote machine. And it's done securely. We have secured protocols for SSH to make sure that nobody is sniffing in the middle. Now, this is a replacement to older utilities. You may hear people talk about using Telnet and some other rlogin and other older utilities that they would use, and this replaces it. It's a very common way to both manage remote machines and access remote machines for a variety of reasons. In fact, one of the most common things you'll hear from both Linux guys and Unix guys are, I need to, let's SSH to that box and do something to it. Now, one of the things is while you can get programs that offer SSH capabilities on Windows, Windows has its own built-in management tools called PowerShell. And PowerShell has part of it is called PowerShell remoting. And that's similar to SSH. It works a little bit differently, but it gives you the same kind of concept where if you see here, I'm entering enter PS session to a computer name. I can send different credentials for authentication if I want, or it's going to use the credentials I currently have on my machine, and it'll connect me to that remote machine. I can now execute commands on that remote machine to manage whatever I do. The important part to this is that you will be working in some sort of shell, whether it be a bash-based shell or something like that, or Windows PowerShell, and you're going to need to be able to connect remotely. The importance is that it's done securely so that nobody can sniff what you're doing and what things that you're executing. That's what SSH does primarily on Linux, and PowerShell remoting does on Windows. In the SSCP crypto course, we spent a lot of time talking about the integrity of data and how we could do that. One way to do that is with hashing. And we talked about some of the different hashing algorithms. And I used a hashing example. You might recognize this screen where I changed a text file and was running an MD5 algorithm hash just to show that the numbers get changed so that you could tell if somebody had modified a text file. If you wrote a text file and got the hash algorithm and you ran that and got the hash for it, and then went back and checked it later and the number was different, you know it got changed. And in these examples, to show you the numbers, I was using Windows PowerShell, and Windows PowerShell has a built-in command that you can use called get-file-hash. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to give you a document that gives you other programs that you can use for hashing, but I just wanted you to know that you have one that's built right in that lets you use a variety of different protocols. Now, what I had done, though, was I had written my own version of this, and changed what it displayed because I was using it more of a research or learning tool. The version that I wrote was called Get My File Hash. It would let you give a path to a file, or you could get a collection of files. You could take more than one file, and it would display all of the algorithms that were supported by Windows, that were built in supported by Windows, and the different hash numbers that they would get. So you not only got to look at MD5, you got to look at SHA-1, SHA-256, all the way up to SHA-512. So you could see, you got triple DES, so you could see the difference and how these hashes looked for what you were using. Now, I've gotten a lot of requests about this, so I wanted to give this to you because this isn't built into Windows, and I haven't shared it anywhere else, but you get it here with the additional files. You will get a module that has Get My File Hash in it. Now, I could show you the code to this, but unless you're into PowerShell, the code doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what I wanted to do was give you the module and tell you how to install it if you wanted to play with this. Now, if you are into PowerShell, please feel free to go ahead and look at the code that's in this module and feel free to change it, modify it, make it your own, make your own tool if you want. It's there for you. So out of the files that you can download, you'll extract the hash.zip, which becomes a folder called hash. And you copy that hash folder to C program files. There's a space between there in program files. Windows PowerShell modules. You copy that folder out there. This is a place where you can write your own PowerShell modules, and those modules and those commands or functions that you wrote into those modules will be available to you when you open up a PowerShell session. Now, I wrote this to help you understand how to use it. So I put in some help and some examples. So once you have it copied out there, you can do get-help, get-my-file-hash-detailed, and it's going to give you a bunch of information about what it does. And there's a couple of examples in there on how to use it so you can start looking at files and getting results right away. You don't have to code anything yourself in this case. But please feel free, if you are into it, change it, suit your own needs, do whatever you want with it. And having said that, this is one way to be able to work with file hashes and take a look at them. It's a great learning tool for that. But now it's time I want to give you a lot more tools to help you out. One of the challenges that I've always had learning anything, and not just cryptography or anything else in security, but anything at all, is that sometimes the concepts are difficult to grasp unless you put your hands on it. For me, especially in computers, it's always been, I need to sit down and work with it. I need to actually do it. And that'll help me further understand the concepts and put things together. And so one of the best things I think for further advancement of study is to work with tools that can help you learn more about this. So I've created a document for you, and this will list several tools. And like I had mentioned before, it's not the ultimate comprehensive list, but it's a great list to get started with that you can use to further your understanding. And I've broken it up into sections that I'll show you here in just a second. But I need to start with this disclaimer. And you're in this ethical hacking course. You've heard this over and over again, but a couple of things. One, I want to make sure I get my view out on it. First of all, anytime you use any tools that are out there, you want to make sure that you're running them in an isolated environment till you're fully aware of what they do. And you can set up a VM and you can set it to isolation mode where it's not talking on the network. It's not talking to other VMs or your own computer, but you need to make sure that it's isolated. And if you happen to start studying things like viruses and worms and stuff, you want a completely isolated, different system that can be destroyed completely from the ground up, that kind of stuff, when you're working with these tools. The other thing I want to point out is that be sure that you're not using these tools at the office. There's a lot of companies that running some of these tools in ethical hacking, not these crypto tools per se, but a lot of other tools, are against corporate policy. So you need to check in your company's environment what is allowed. As a matter of fact, I have a friend that works at a company that he's the architect of their internal security infrastructure. They actually monitor for the use of any of these tools, and if they detect it, they just walk you out of the building. It's done. It's over. So please, please, please be very careful when you work with these tools, and please check with, if you're going to do this at work, you got to get some approval for this. Now, so what did I give you? Well, the tools that include different categories. I wanted you to have some hash tools. In file integrity is very important, and I want you to be able to explore that, not just with the tools that I gave you, but some additional hash tools that'll let you check out hashes. There's even a couple of tools that'll let you try to crack an older hash or something like that, so that you can get an idea of how this is going on. I also wanted you to have some cryptography tools, actually encrypt some stuff, cryptography tools that might be important to you in your own life, tools that will encrypt your disks, tools that will encrypt files for you, and encrypt messages for you, things to look at that you can look at, and that'll also help you understand some of the algorithms and how the algorithms work. Disk encryption tools, I gave you a couple here that you can work with to encrypt your disks, and one of those uses PGP, and I actually like that tool quite a bit, to encrypt your volumes and manage systems where you want to have disk encryption. And I also gave you some tools on cryptanalysis where you can study some of the algorithms and how they work. There are a couple of great tools out there. Also, one of the things I gave you that you'll see is a great free online tool that helps trying to educate you. That's one of my favorite things, helping me to understand more. So when you look at this document, what you're going to see is the name of the tool. You're going to see a short description of what the tool does, and then a link that'll take you out to the tool. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, not all these tools are free. It's hard to pay your mortgage on free, and some of these tools are really great tools that require developers to develop on them. So they're not all free, but even the ones that you have to pay for, they're not very expensive. So you can decide for yourself if you want to take a look at them or not. Maybe talk to some other friends that might use them.